Previously in the complete creation.
And the mountains were covered. In either case, you have a miracle. Either it was a global flood, which was a miraculous judgment, or you had a local flood, which rose 15 cubits higher than the tallest mountain. Welcome back again. We have approached the question of creation or evolution from a historical perspective, philosophical perspective, a scientific perspective. But what about Jesus's perspective? If Jesus were standing here today in the midst of this debate, and we asked him if he believed in evolution or creation, what do you think he would say? Now, you've probably all seen the bracelets with WWJD on them. What would Jesus do? It's an excellent thought-provoking question, and let us not forget some of the surprising answers. You know, beating people with a whip embedded with glass shards and publicly calling people snakes are two of the things on that list of things that Jesus would do. But just as important, or perhaps even more important a question, is what would Jesus believe? Now, I totally scammed the title for this lecture from fellow creation speaker Tino Groppi, but I loved his title so much as it was just so appropriate. What would Jesus believe? How would he answer our questions about creation and evolution, or the age of the earth? It might come as a surprise to many that in the manual, Jesus did in fact answer these very questions. Let's start with the age of the earth. Does the Bible give us an indication of its age? Absolutely. Now, obviously, the Bible doesn't say, oh, the earth is 6,000 years old. Instead, what we do have is exhaustive chronologies in both Matthew and Luke, tracing the ancestry of Christ right back to Adam and Eve. We know the ages of most of the parents when they had their children, so we can calculate the years and make estimations for the birth dates that we don't know. We can thus calculate to within a few years of when Adam and Eve were created. As a matter of fact, be sure to stop in at the Big Valley Creation Science Museum in Big Valley, Alberta, to see the reproduction of two 52-foot scrolls from the Lambeth Palace in England, tracing the genealogy of King Henry VI right back through to Adam and Eve. England was certainly not the only country to do this, as genealogical records were very important to kingdoms. This is how you knew who the line of kings were. 17th century Archbishop James Ussher used this technique to calculate the creation started at nightfall of Saturday, October 22nd, 4004 BC. We are just a little over 2,000 years after Christ. Adam and Eve were created on day 6 of the creation week, so that would place the age of the earth at around 6,000 years old. The old earth faith has become so prevalent in society that it is now completely natural for the believer's mind to try to look for ways that maybe an old earth can fit into the biblical timeline. But as you will see, it cannot fit. Nevertheless, in many people's minds, the question of allegory comes up. Was the creation week described in Genesis allegory and not literal history? Were Adam and Eve allegorical or metaphorical, or were they real people? Jesus answered both questions in a clear-cut way when he was asked about marriage. And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read, that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Again in Mark, we read his response. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. When? The beginning. But hold up. Jesus takes it one step farther. Notice what Adam said after God formed Eve and brought her to Adam. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Flash back to what Jesus said in Mark. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. Not only was it obvious he was talking about Adam and Eve as literal people, he even quoted Adam. It becomes pretty obvious what Jesus believed. He believed, or should I say he knew, that Adam and Eve were literal people. In the beginning. Not millions of years of evolution later, but in the beginning. They were not allegorical. Jesus even quoted Adam. To Jesus, this was all literal history, involving literal people in a literal creation at the literal beginning of literal history. So what about other wildly unbelievable stories of miraculous events in the Old Testament, like Jonah and the whale? Is that allegorical? Well, not according to Jesus. In response to the Pharisees asking Jesus for a sign, though they had already seen plenty of them, Jesus responded with a prophecy about himself. An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. To Jesus, Jonah being swallowed and then vomited up 3 days later was a literal story. Jesus actually used this as an example in a prophecy of soon-to-come literal events. Jonah was not allegory to Jesus. The fact that Jesus did rise from the dead tells me that Jesus knows a lot more than I know. I think I'll pay close attention to what he says and what he deems as literal history. We saw in the last lecture that Jesus did the exact same thing with the story of Noah, the great flood, and the ark. Not only were all those people real people, the flood a real global flood, and the ark a real object and not allegorical, Jesus specifically called upon the whole story and prophecy to what was going to go down in the end times. Please note, Jesus could have spoken to deep time if he wanted to. Instead, he chose to speak about a worldwide flood as literal recent history. There is no in-between. Either there was a worldwide flood or there was deep time. There is no third option for explaining the geologic history of Earth. Many people have leaned toward the belief that God perhaps used evolution to create our species. Did God perhaps direct evolution to create man? As my good friend Dr. Carl E. Baugh points out in his book, Why Do Men Believe Evolution Against All Odds? Evolution is no new concept. Charles Darwin was a very late player in the game. Anaximander of Miletus had speculated his own theory of evolution, with the origin of humans arising from sea animals around 550 years before Christ. So, if God had used evolution to create man, surely Jesus would have said something like, "Have ye not read how Anaximander, the Greek, saw in a vision Adam and Eve arising from the fishes? O ye of little faith!" Instead, Jesus specifically referred to the creation account in the book of Genesis as literal history. Now, while God could have used evolution, this was against his very character. Evolution uses sickness, disease, and death to produce life. Mutations are sickness and disease, yet it is mutations that cause the changes in organisms. Natural selection weeds out, that's a fancy word for kills, the organisms that are weaker. This is how evolution works. Yet God views death as an enemy. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Well, if God used death to produce life, why would he call it an enemy? Over and over again, the creation account says how God saw that it was very good. If the fossil record represents the history of man's evolution, then you have God calling death, disease, and sickness very good. You also have death for billions of years before the sin of Adam and Eve. So now God's creation process is to blame for death in the world, not the sin of Adam and Eve. If disease and sickness were used to produce life, why would Jesus heal the sick? In fact, the accounts of Jesus healing the sick provide an excellent lesson for us in relation to the creation evolution question of what would Jesus believe. When Jesus came into Cana, he was met by a nobleman whose son was sick and about to die. Jesus saith unto him, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Thy son liveth. What did Jesus do? He spoke the miracle into existence. The son was some 20 miles away. Jesus didn't go and perform surgery or give him some medicine. He spoke, and it was done. Did it take millions of years for the miracle to happen? Nope. He spoke, and it was done. Can blind chance form the seeing eye by evolutionary processes? Of course not. Yet, when blind Bartimaeus came to Jesus, Jesus said unto him, Go thy way, thy faith had made thee whole. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. Did Jesus perform LASIK eye surgery? Essentially, he created new eyes by speaking them into existence. It didn't take millions of years of evolution to produce these eyes. Jesus spoke, and it was. It was the same with Lazarus, a man who had been dead for 4 days. Jesus had them open the tomb. Jesus cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes. What, did Jesus go and perform CPR on the dead corpse? Nope. Did he use a defibrillator on the corpse? Nope. Raising someone back to life who's been dead for 4 days is on par with creating life from a pile of dirt. Jesus spoke, and approximately 2 billion years later, the body came to life. Is that what happened? No. It was immediate. So why then would we question Genesis, where it says over and over again throughout chapter 1 that God spoke and it just was? Why would one then assume that those miracles in Genesis took millions and millions of years when it's obvious Jesus did equivalent miracles instantaneously, just by speaking them into existence exactly as described in Genesis. Now, while there is no reason to consider the days of creation in Genesis as anything other than literal days, still many have tried to propose that they are figurative, representing ages, perhaps thousands or millions of years. Well, when you look at the days of creation, each one has a number, and a morning and an evening, and day and night associated with it. Now, while it's true that the Hebrew word for day, yom, can be figurative for something other than a literal 24-hour day, when we look in the rest of the scriptures, we find that when the word is used with a number, morning and evening, or day and night associated with it, it was always a literal day. It's as if God looked ahead to our struggles today in the modern age with this old earth deception and emphasized that the days of creation were literal 24-hour days. Now, some might rightfully ask the question, well, what about 2 Peter? But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Indeed. What about it? Could this mean that the 6 days of creation were actually, 6,000 years? No, for several reasons. But one must ask, why would you invoke this verse to try and make the days of creation longer than literal 24-hour days? If the days of creation were 1,000-year days, you have a math problem. Adam was created on day 6, lived through day 7, but died at a measly 930 years old. Obviously, if they were 1,000-year days, he would have been a lot older. But let's take it a step farther. While we as Christians believe that the Holy Bible is the inspired Word of God, that is, that God directed the people to write what they did in this book, I contend there is one portion of this Bible that is not inspired. The 10 Commandments. These were not inspired, but rather they were written in stone by the finger of God himself. One of those 10 Commandments refers to the Sabbath day, or the day of rest. The work week was based on the work week of God as he created the heavens and earth and all that was within them. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, I don't know about you, I'm exhausted enough after working a 6-day work week. I don't want to work 6 million years and take 1 million years off. Clearly, the word written here, by the very finger of God, was specifically referring to a literal 6-day creation and a literal 1-day Sabbath. Still others have suggested that there is perhaps a gap of time between verses 1 and 2 in Genesis chapter 1. The original Hebrew profoundly refutes this speculation. You see, the Old Testament, originally being written in Paleo-Hebrew, had no punctuation. Punctuation was conveyed using letters, grammar, and spacing. In fact, there wasn't even chapters or verses. Those were all added in later. In the original biblical Hebrew, there was a form of parenthetical punctuation that was so scarce as to be virtually non-existent. It was called a flipped nun. Okay, bad joke. It was a Hebrew letter pronounced with a long O like noon. Here you can see one of my historic scrolls, Torah scrolls, with the letter noon. Now, very rarely the scribes would use an inverted letter nun to act as brackets, parentheses. This took on several variations over the years, with sometimes flipping the lower part of the letter horizontally so that it takes on a Z shape with the vertical stroke going left instead of right. Other times they flipped the entire letter horizontally or vertically. The kind people of Kealat Bet Yosef, Netherlands, showed us one example here found on their Torah scrolls. In this particular instance, the scribe reversed the lower half of the letter nun horizontally. This strange form of punctuation only appears 9 times in the entire Old Testament. 7 of those occasions was in Psalms 107 alone. Yet in the Old Testament, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of parenthetical verses. None of them used flipped nuns. They are all normally indicated using grammar and letters. Allow me to make a crude analogy. In English, we add a letter S to the end of a word to denote possession. That letter links the previous word and the next words. For example, we could say, the car of Fred was very fast. But that is not the normal way we do it. We normally tack on the letter S. Fred's car was very fast. The letter S adds possession between Fred and his car. It's a crude analogy, but in a somewhat similar fashion in biblical Hebrew, they used the letter Vav to connect words or sentences together instead of punctuation, which did not exist in the text. Gesenius, known as the father of modern Hebrew lexicography, first published his fascinating work on Hebrew grammar in 1817. He discussed at great length the multiple ways the letter Vav would connect words, sentences, or even entire paragraphs. Specifically, using the letter Vav would be similar to inserting the English words to wit, or inserting brackets indicating a parenthetical statement. Gesenius called this Vav explicativum. Genesis 1 verse 2 starts off with this Vav explicativum. So let's write out the first 3 verses in English exactly as Gesenius suggests. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. To wit, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. You could also write it out using parentheses. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So there you have it. There is no gap between verses 1 and 2 because verse 2 is a parenthetical statement connecting verses 1 and 3. Where there is no gap, there is no place for billions of years of Earth history. Lastly, Christ was to die on the cross to pay the consequences of sin. What sin? The original sin of Adam and Eve. The consequences of that sin are listed in Genesis: death, pain, thorns, shame of nakedness, and a broken relationship with our Creator God. God had warned Adam and Eve that if they partook of the knowledge of good and evil, they would have to die. The first thing that happened when Adam and Eve sinned was their relationship with God was broken. They hid themselves from Him in shame. God was merciful, and instead of killing them, He instead killed an animal and used the skins to make clothes for Adam and Eve to cover their shame and restore their relationship to God. This is why animal sacrifice was initiated as a ceremony, to be a constant reminder of what we deserved, yet an innocent died because of our sin. to restore our relationship with God, which was severed by our sin. This would also be symbolic of Christ dying in our place. And you can now understand the symbolism the Apostle Paul was using when he said we put on Christ, much like clothing. And we are viewed as innocent in the eyes of God, who now sees his innocent Son. Now look at the price Christ paid at the cross. He suffered tremendous pain, was given a crown of thorns. While we always depict him covered for modesty, the truth is he was crucified naked and openly shamed, and he died the death we deserved. Christ's death on the cross makes no sense unless the Genesis account of creation and the fall is literal history. It is not out of line to say that evolution nullifies the death of Christ on the cross and our need for salvation. The act of putting on Christ is what is called being born again. You are reborn a new creature. All that involves is turning from your sins, asking Jesus to forgive you, and giving your life wholly and completely to him. If you haven't done that yet, the time is running out, and Jesus could return today. And where would that leave you? All right, I'm out of time for this lecture. I hope you'll join me again next time.
Coming up in the next Complete Creation.
Imagine walking out in the middle of nowhere and you see this strange formation. It's only sand and rocks. Would you conclude that this formation came about by strictly natural processes, unguided by any intelligence?
You can catch the entire series in a variety of ways. You can watch the show online at www.completecreation.org or www.genesisweek.com. You can also purchase the Complete Creation series in full high definition on Blu-ray or video on demand at completecreation.org. Or support the Miracle Channel with a monthly tax-deductible donation and access the entire Complete Creation series in high definition through Corco, Miracle Channel's video on demand service. We need your support to keep this program on the air, so please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North, Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. Or you can make a donation via PayPal online at ianjuby.org/donations. And thank you for your support.